Her chat, the chat is known as, the title I should say is If You Know, You Know, but No, You Don't Know. Emily is an independent consultant based in Ottawa, Canada, so I am sure she is really cold right now. She's an aspiring writer and speaker and is passionate about promoting the BA role and the BA profession. She supports all of us, fellow business analysts, aspiring business analysts, et cetera, with their careers via mentorship and just knowledge sharing, which is a terrific skill to have and a terrific attribute to have as a person. And as a leader and as a practicing business analyst, Emily has firsthand experience in getting to know and understand stakeholders in order to achieve positive results. So with that, I'll yield the floor to Emily, and I believe, Steve, you're running the slides, right?
No,
Yeah,
I'm only just
I'm
going to share
yeah, I'm
my
Okay.
gonna
thoughts.
jump in and
All right.
share.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you so much for the introduction. I really appreciate that. And I look forward to sharing and learning from all of you folks. So please, I'm starting to share. Please let me know when you can see the cover page.
Yeah, pretty bad.
All right. All right. If you know, you know, but no, you don't know, but you want to know. When I came up with this title, I was doing a whole play on words. This is not meant to be condescending or insulting to all of you. It's really from a BA perspective, we want to know things. We want to be able to do our elicitation. And sometimes we hit obstacles or are not given enough time or resources to do our elicitation. So what I wanted to come and speak to you about is how do we deal with this kind of limitation and what kind of techniques can we use to get that information that we really need in order to be productive? Right, so you see the agenda page now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I wanted to cover a few things today. First, we need to get past just gather requirements. I don't know if many of you have heard this from your stakeholders, your clients, your employers. Just go write the requirements, just go gather them like they're there for picking. We also want to be able to use our elicitation techniques to get information quickly, to be productive early on in a project or an engagement. I think it's also important that we develop a common understanding with all of our stakeholders. This is where we can add real value. We do our elicitation to get pieces of information, but we're not supposed to hoard all that information. We're supposed to share that information with our stakeholders. And then let's take it a step further and work on defining success. We want to advance the project. So we want to get people on our side and get some buy-in and help them achieve success. So that's what we're going to cover tonight. If you have any questions, please jump in. I don't want to wait till the end to have the conversation. Please jump in if you have questions. I will be mindful of the time as well. All right. So just gather requirements, Emily. And I sit there and cross my arms, and I'm going to be really stubborn about just gathering requirements. The sad truth is that BAs and the work we do is often seen as an expense because it's not part of the product. Doing the planning for our elicitation activities, synthesizing all the information before we even write down user stories and come up with solutions, that's all seen as an expense, as an overhead. And that's why they want us to cut corners and hurry up and write those requirements. And I have faced this throughout my 20 plus years in business analysis. And I think some of you might have also experienced this too. I know that this is really frustrating, and we want to be able to get as much information as we can right from the start of a project or even throughout the project, but we keep hitting obstacles. But there is a happy truth, and that is that BAs do add value to a project. And when I say project here, I'm using the term loosely. I'm not talking about the difference between agile and waterfall. What I'm talking about is any piece of work we're working on we do add value. We're not an expense. We're not just overhead. We're the ones who create clarity and common understanding for our stakeholders. Someone needs to do the business analysis. If we simply take people's word for granted and then we write down what they told us as a scribe, pass that information to the developers on an IT project, you know what's going to happen. The requirements, the user stories, the scenarios, they won't be accurate. And then people have to do some rework. So someone needs to do business analysis. And this is where we really need the opportunity to do elicitation. We need to be able to get that relevant information so that we can be successful. We know that throughout our elicitation, sometimes we come across information that's not very useful or not relevant. So it's important that we're able to home in on the information that's useful so that we can pass it on to the solution implementers. And of course, the work that we do is more than just requirements gathering and process mapping. I've seen some of my stakeholders, mostly because I'm in consulting, I've seen my clients roll their eyes when I talk about process mapping. They think it's going to be some really long endeavor. We're going to end up with a Visio swim lane diagram that is too complicated for them to understand or that doesn't really add a lot of value. My view of this is that we do have to understand the process somehow. We have to understand what is the business we're trying to support. It doesn't have to be a complicated Visio diagram. And we know that stakeholders don't always say what they mean, and they don't mean what they say. And that's why, as BAs, we can lend our expertise by getting down to the important information and doing good elicitation. So this is where BAs can add a lot of value. And even if they see us as an expense, and even if they see us as just overhead on the project, have the confidence that you are adding value to the project. Now, how do you do this and get through all the frustration? This is where I want to channel Mary Poppins. I don't know if you folks have seen the original 1964 version of Mary Poppins, but she has the song A Spoonful of Sugar. A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. So when I'm doing my BA work, I try to keep positive about the elicitation work I'm doing. Every bit of information that I'm collecting may add to the big picture and can add to the solution. And there are ways to communicate with your stakeholders so that the elicitation process doesn't have to be painful. The elicitation process can help the stakeholders feel a sense of ownership in the solution. So we can do this by giving them a spoonful of sugar to help the elicitation medicine go down. What are some of the techniques that are useful? And this is where I think that as BAs, we have to be selective. You know how the Babok has 50 techniques? It doesn't mean you have to use all 50 of them. We have to use our judgment. And the first step that I think of is, what am I trying to accomplish? As a BA, what do I need to learn in order to be able to produce something that's useful for the people who are building the solution? It could be a technical solution or a process solution or something about people, but I still need to understand what's my goal here as a BA. And then I think of the techniques that I need to apply, and I'm pretty selective so that I can get the information that's relevant quickly. And one of the pro tips I have for you when you're doing this and you're selecting techniques is just do it. Don't announce the techniques that you're gonna do because it can cause confusion. They'll say, Emily, what the heck is a stakeholder onion diagram? I've never heard of this, so no, we're not going to do it. That's why I think it's important to use your own judgment, to use the techniques that you think will help you accomplish your goal, and just do it. I don't know if you've heard of the expression, it's better to ask for forgiveness than to beg for permission. I think it's important just to dive in and do your business analysis as long as you're achieving the results that are necessary. For me, there are 3 techniques that I found the most useful when I'm on a new project, and I go from project to project as a consultant. Normally, my contracts last from 1 to 2 years long, so I'm always going to different clients, and I have to learn quickly. How do I do that? I use these 3 techniques the most often. The 5 W's plus the 1 H, and I'll go into detail about these. The stakeholder onion diagram, and understanding the end-to-end process. Let's dive into these and see what they're about. The 5 W's and the 1 H. So this is really this is what a journalist would do, for example. They would try to understand the who, what, when, where, why, and how. I want to do that with a little bit more perspective and look at all 5 of these questions at a strategic level, a tactical level, and an operational level. So when we look at a strategic level, we're looking at the overall organization strategy. And when I'm asking questions or trying to find out about the who, what, when, where, why, and how details, I'm looking at it in terms of the organization's long-term goals. This could be done by looking at their strategic report, listening in their annual meetings. What is their roadmap? Where do they want to go? What are some organization-wide goals and impacts? You know how at a strategic level, the executives come up with all these big ideas. All of those ideas are supposed to be cascaded down to the tactical and operational level. When we talk about the operational level, that means what do we have to do in order to implement the strategy? So what kinds of projects, what kinds of initiatives and endeavors do we have to take on in order to implement what we said in the strategic plan? So again, when I'm looking at the tactical level, I'm asking those same questions, the 5 W's plus the 1 H. And then I talk to people at the operational level, the people who are actually doing the job, and getting some details about who, what, when, where, why, and how. And I don't want to freak people out when I'm doing this elicitation. I don't walk around with this blank table. I ask questions and I note the answers down separately and I plot them in this chart offline so that they know that I'm not just trying to fill a template. I'm just listening to what they're telling me. What are the details about the 5 W's and the 1 H? And it is important to talk about it at the 3 levels because that way you know that everything that's done at the ground floor level supports things up at the higher level. Are there any questions? I will go into an example in a sec, but are there any questions so far? Okay. All right, there's a lot of text here. I'm not going to read it all, but I can walk you through an example. Let's say you have an organization that sells products to a customer. When you listen to their pain points and you listen to what they're talking about at the strategic level, look at the why here. The problem they're trying to solve is that there's declining customer loyalty. So this is where I'm going to start asking, why do you think there's declining customer loyalty? And then I could talk to some people at the tactical level and understand the current state of their customer base. So what are your customer segments? And are there certain customer segments that are starting to drop off? I could look at the operational level, talk to some salespeople who are doing the operations of selling things and ask them, why do you think this customer segment is starting to decline? So this is where you look at it at the 3 levels and it's all connecting. And then I ask those similar questions to understand who, for example, who is your customer base? who in the organization is responsible for for supporting the customers. The customer care team, the sales and marketing team could also be impacted by whatever change we do. So it's really important to understand a problem from all these different facets. And this is not an overnight thing. This is not something that you can do within one workshop, I don't think. I think this really requires you to talk to people, get in front of your stakeholders and talk to them day to day and ask them what's on their mind. When you talk to the strategic people, the people at the, let's say, director level, you can ask them, you know, given that we're trying to achieve these roadmap things, who do you think is going to be impacted? What do you think we need to do in order to address declining customer loyalty? How do we get better? How do we deliver better customer service? And over time, when do you think we'll be able to accomplish this? So you're talking about all these things in conversation. It can be done through a workshop or it can be done through interviews. It can also be done by looking at documentation. But of course, you have to validate what you read in static documentation. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to keep going. This diagram might be familiar to some of you. If you open up the IIBA BABOK, this is in chapter 10, one of the techniques, the stakeholder onion diagram. And for me, it looks like a theoretical diagram, but it really is it has a practical purpose. When you look at the layers of this diagram, you have the small circle, which is the group of people who are building a solution. So it could be a specific project team, and they are working on a specific solution. They're building a piece of code. They could be working on some training, things like that. Then you look at the next level up, which is the affected organizational level. These are the people who are sort of on the receiving end of this solution. It could be end users. It could be the help desk, the support team, the people who have to support the solution once it's been implemented. The organization or the enterprise is also part of the stakeholder group. You could have sponsors, executives, you could have certain lines of business in the organization who are impacted by the solution. And of course, you can have external stakeholders. In the example I talked about, the sales organization, they have customers and they have suppliers. They could also have regulators that they have to comply with. So for me, the stakeholder onion diagram is useful because sometimes we only ever care about maybe the first two layers, the first three layers. For me, it's important that we understand everybody who's impacted by a solution, whether or not they're part of the solution, they're building the solution, or they are on the receiving end of a solution. So I think it's important to understand all of this so that we can ask the right questions and we can make sure that when we're making decisions on how the solution will be built or we're making decisions on requirements, we've taken into account all the different kinds of stakeholders. One of the things that I keep on encountering in almost every IT project is the IT solution is built, but then not enough training was given to the help desk, or not enough thought was given to the people who are going to maintain the solution, the system administrators or the user administrators. So I think it's important to understand all these different layers so that you can speak on behalf of these stakeholders. And I wouldn't recommend that you walk around with this diagram, but I do recommend that when you ask your questions, your line of questioning aligns with all these different layers. So for example, when we talk about the automation of a particular process, I could turn around and say, oh, so today that process is done manually. Who does that process manually? and how do they do it? And how are we going to get them to adapt to the automated solution? So I try to get the stakeholders to be aware that even if they make what they think is a small decision, it could impact other people. Any questions so far? Please feel free to jump in if you have questions. Okay, I'm not going to type in here, but this is just some interaction here. I'm looking for all of you to jump in or type in the chat. Yes, Tony, did you have a question?
Yeah, Emily, actually, I wanted to ask you. So the five why is certainly one that I'm familiar with. I think that it benefits from that cross-pollination. Six Sigma, even PMI has incorporated. The stakeholder onion, though, seems to be one that we business analysts, we IIBAers really like, but that quite hasn't made its way to prime time, if you would. So I know that you mentioned that you don't necessarily tell your your clients, "Hey, we're going to do a stakeholder onion diagram." So could you walk us a little bit, perhaps, or maybe you have it later in the presentation, when you talk about the why and the how, and perhaps if maybe after they acknowledge it and they look at it, they say, "Oh yeah, we've done that, but we call it something else."
I haven't had we call it something else situation.
Okay.
Uh, I've worked on things like stakeholder lists. So I wouldn't necessarily walk around with this onion diagram. It's going to freak people out because it's too different. What you could do is make this a simple Excel table and write down these four levels and document who do you think are the stakeholders in each of these levels, but really think about the stakeholders of a given change. So if we're going to automate a specific feature, let's say, then you know the solution delivery team is impacted because they have to build this thing. And then you work your way all the way up. For a given change, who are the stakeholders who are contributing to this change or who will be impacted by the change? And you could do it in a table format. So I wouldn't walk around with this diagram, but write down these details because if you have a blank there, for example, let's say you didn't write down who are the external stakeholders, then we might be forgetting our customers or suppliers. So you'll have a gap there. The way of looking at these different layers helps you make sure that you're not missing any stakeholders. Does that help?
It does. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. So, you know, the format for me doesn't really, it's not something that I factor in. It's more like, I need to get this information and I'm going to write it down. I'm not going to tell so and so to fill out the onion diagram. I'm just going to ask questions to be able to get down to these details. Okay, so let's try and go through this. I'm not going to write down in the table here, but if anyone wants to put in the chat, or I see some hands raised. Tony, did you have another question?
No, sorry, I forgot to lower my
Okay.
hand.
No,
Not
Emily,
Javier?
sorry. Yeah,
Yes. Hi.
sorry, on it. Back on the previous example, when you're looking at the onion and you're looking at the different procedure, in the projects that you have worked, um, do you have used the onion on individual functions that you are changing, or you're just looking at the onion as the overall for the project?
That's a great question. Realistically, I'm not going to plot the onion diagram for each and every change.
Okay.
Realistically, I look at the what is the purpose of this project? And
Mm-hmm.
who would be involved in the solution of it, who are the affected organization units, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, for me, the beauty of this diagram is that it helps you separate the stakeholders into four categories. I know that we've seen I think most of you or many of you might have seen the stakeholder impact and influence matrix. It's a 2x2 matrix, and you're plotting who are the stakeholders who are most impacted or least impacted. Who are the stakeholders who have the most influence or the least influence, and you plot it in this 2x2 matrix. My problem with that is that it doesn't necessarily help you think about stakeholders across the whole organization or even outside the organization. For me, the stakeholder onion diagram is more useful because it helps me think of every stakeholder along the whole chain who might be impacted. And yeah, you're right. I don't do it for every little change. I do this more at a holistic project level, this or solution level. We're creating this solution, and who are all the people who are contributing to this or who are impacted by this.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, I want to hear more of you folks speak here. As an example, let's go through this exercise. As an example, let's say you have a company that's providing training courses to organizations, and they have been seeing that the sales are declining over the past 2 years. So let's say someone has the bright idea that the solution will be to create some BI reports. That part of the solution is to create some BI reports to understand customer data in order to find some solutions that could increase the sales. Let's just shout out, if someone wants to just put in the chat or shout out who would be impacted or part of the group that's in solution delivery.
Whoever's providing your data that are going to go into your Power BI reports.
True. Yep. How about the people building the Power BI reports, right? So this is part of the solution. What about affected organizational unit? So in the organization, who might be some people who are impacted by the solution? They're not necessarily building the solution, but they're impacted by it.
Whoever's meant to gain value from the Power BI reports, I guess. So
Yeah.
sales, management,
Yeah, go to market teams.
product, yeah, go to market.
That's great. Maybe also anybody who's supporting the solution. Okay. What about the organization or enterprise? So when you think of this company, who in the company would be at a company level would be impacted? VP sales, I suppose, or even perhaps the people who are developing the training products. And who might be some external stakeholders?
Customers.
Yeah. So the people receiving training. Yeah. All right. So right now, let's say you have a company that has no BI reports. They're doing everything just by gut feel. When you're looking at building a solution, then you can think about who are all impacted. When we think about the external stakeholders, for example, we said that the customers, the people who are receiving training, their customers. If we need to start collecting more data in order to have good reports, that means we have to collect more data from these customers. Maybe they might have their backs up about providing this additional data. So those are the kinds of things that you would take into consideration when you're building the solution. So you see how it's it's not it's not an exact science, but it does help to plot out who are the stakeholders at the 4 levels. And let's not forget everyone at the 4 levels. Any questions? Okay. I'm going to move on to end-to-end process. I think it's important as BAs to understand that every solution that we work on, it's at the end of the day, it's really to support the business. It's to support how people do their jobs end to end. If we put in a solution and there's a gap in the middle of their process, or the solution doesn't support the middle piece of the process, that's not an elegant solution. That's why I think it's important for BAs to really understand the high-level process end to end. So you talk to people who are responsible for performing the process. You could also do some observation, right? Watch them how they go from one step to the next step. And if you stay high level, then this can be less onerous for the stakeholders that you're eliciting requirements from. You can talk about, how do you go from beginning to end, and you limit it to maybe 3 or 4 end-to-end processes, 3 or 4 use cases, so that it's not onerous. You start somewhere, you start small and you start high level, and then you can do a bit of a deeper dive by going into sub-steps. So when you focus on the first step, then you can drill into what are all the sub-steps that support that first process. And you don't necessarily have to create a very busy process flow diagram. If you stay high level, you're going to be able to understand the big picture. And I think that's really important for us. Understand the big picture, the sequence of steps, because that's going to help us make sure we don't forget things or we don't get things in the wrong order. So doing this at a high level and then drilling down into sub-steps will really help. But again, it doesn't have to be a Visio diagram where you cover every inch of white space on the page. So let's look at the example again of this company that's trying to sell business analysis training courses to organizations. And they've seen that the sales have been declining over the past 2 years. Let's say it's in every region of North America. And let's say you have a chance to talk to the sales team. This could be a bit of an old-fashioned scenario, but let's say the sales team just does cold calls. When the sales team talks to the prospective clients, they talk about training needs. And then they set up 1-year contracts for certain rates on the courses. So that's a very high level process. And then you can dive a little bit deeper and talk to someone in sales and understand how they go about doing their calls. So the sales rep calls a client organization to book an appointment. They get the contact information from the individual and they set up a meeting. They talk to the individual, and going into that meeting, they go in with their standard course catalog without any preliminary research. So this is a very simplistic example, but I wouldn't doubt that this is the kind of level of detail that you might get initially. When you're doing this, though, you're going to start to uncover where some of the pain points are. When you plot it down like this, you can start talking to the salesperson and start asking them, where are the pain points? What do you think could be made better with a given step? So let's go through some of these best practices. When you're talking about processes, end-to-end processes, it's really important to talk about current state and future state. In my experience, a lot of organizations, they want to cut corners and just jump to the future state because the current state it's too messy for them to even understand. So they come up with their future state. They tell you what this thing is supposed to look like. For me, this creates problems because you don't know what your starting point is. If you don't know what your starting point is, then you can't do gap analysis. You can't estimate how much work or what needs to be done in order to implement a solution if you don't know what your current state is. So I think it's really important to really understand from your stakeholders, what do you do today? Walk me through the steps, even if it's messy, and you write it down. And in working with the solution team, doing some analysis, you can start working on some future state processes. If we reflect back on the example I talked about with that sales organization, what do you think are some of the things that could be wrong with this process? If anyone wants to tell me, what do you think could be some pain points with the cold call process? If anyone wants to jump in.
I'm assuming a lot of organizations won't want to be called in the first place, or won't have easy contacts, or I'm sure most organizations are like most people. Cold calls are a hassle. They don't want to deal with someone cold calling them.
Right. And we don't know what their success rate is. If you make 20 cold calls in a day, how many sales did you actually make? So those are the kinds of questions that looking at this can trigger. So thank you for bringing that up. You know, I think we can all relate to that. What else seems wrong with this process?
I think there would be trust issues.
Okay.
Like, some stranger calls me on the phone and starts asking me questions about my business.
Yep.
Nowadays I'm just going to be too sketchy.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it looks like there's a difference between sales and marketing, right? If there's a way to market your training company to market, what are all the good things about this, it'll be easier to get people to trust, as opposed to saying, I'm a salesperson for this company and this is why you need me, right? And then even like that third step, no preliminary research. So if you walk in, going in there with the standard course catalog, not really understanding what the client's needs are and trying to sell them something that they might not even need, that's also a problem. So you can see how having the conversation and just asking, what do you do today, can help you uncover issues that could be solved. Maybe it's not even a technical solution. There could be some process solutions or training people solutions, right? So this is why it's really important to do discovery. As BAs, we're not just eliciting requirements, we're trying to do some discovery and trying to understand what people do end to end. Great. And we talked about some improvements. I do really want to emphasize the importance of taking time to do current state, even if it's at a high level, or even if it's just one aspect of the organization. You have to start somewhere. You have to understand the current state so that you can do your estimation. You can then size how much work and time and money will it cost to implement a solution. And of course, it's also going to help you with change management. So we covered 3 techniques. I want to dive in a little bit more about the benefits and how do you do it quickly so that people don't think that you're wasting time and just being overhead. Yeah, is there a question?
I was just going to add one more comment. At least in my experience, if you don't do current state analysis, or at least one benefit of it is often you can really determine whether the proposed project is needed at all. On several occasions, we've had a request to do a small project in past jobs, and guess what? Once we did current state analysis, we could achieve immediate results with just process change that were cheaper and quicker than the cost of doing a technology project, and that gave immediate results. And then you can go, okay, let's try this for 6 months and then see if we even still need to spend 50,000, 100,000, whatever for this new software you want.
That's
And
great.
you can't do that without current state analysis and understanding the problems with the current situation.
Thank you so much for sharing, and I'm glad that this has been successful for you. The other thing that we have to keep in mind as BAs is we need to solve the right problem. We don't necessarily want to gold plate and put in all these technical solutions. And to your point, David, home in on the exact problem we're trying to fix. If you home in on the exact problem with the current state, then you'll have a better solution. That's great. I talked about these 3 techniques. These are the 3 that I use that are effective for me when I go into a new project. It helps me get information quickly, and there are some benefits, these solutions, these techniques. So for example, with the 5 W's and the 1 H, it gives you a holistic view of the project at the strategic, tactical, and operational levels. And you can see how everything fits together at the 3 levels in the in the solution, how it's going to help the organization. And how do you do this quickly? I look at things like the project charter, the strategic plan, try to understand what's in the roadmap, what are the goals and objectives. And I don't force people to help me fill out that chart all in one go. I'm doing my elicitation constantly, and I'm plotting the details as I learn them. And this helps you identify the right problem to solve. The stakeholder onion diagram. Like I said, this is to help you understand who are all the people who are impacted by the solution or who are part of the solution. And this way you won't forget about anyone. One of the things that I want to mention, really, for all 3 of these techniques, it's useful to do them all in parallel or do them concurrently. You're collecting information, it could fit within one of these 3 models. So do this in parallel to the end-to-end process. When you're looking at plotting out the end or drawing out the end-to-end process, then it's going to help you understand who are all the stakeholders who are involved. And remember, who is doing the thing and who's affected by the thing. Also keep in mind, how will the solution be sustained? We're putting in a solution. Is there a support team who can maintain the solution? Or we're putting in a solution, and it's something that the customers will enjoy. Are we going to saturate the market with a particular solution and then no one wants it anymore? So these are things that we should be considering when we're doing the stakeholder onion diagram. And then there's also the end-to-end process. So we're implementing a solution to support the business. I'm not doing these diagrams just for the fun of it. We're not just building a solution just because someone told us to. We're building a solution because we have to be able to support the business. An organization is in existence because it's performing certain business functions. And those are the things that we're trying to understand. What are the most common business functions from beginning to end? And whatever solution we put in place needs to make sure that it supports the beginning to end and doesn't break anything. It's okay to stay high level, and it's also okay if they give you more details. Write it down. But I would say start with the high level because that way it won't be overwhelming for people. Of course, do the current state and the future state. And the other thing that I think is helpful is to identify what parts in the process are manual versus automated, or what parts in the process are the most tedious or the most problematic, because that's going to help you identify the pain points or identify where the issues are. And then you'll be able to do more elicitation and you'll be able to prioritize the solution on that particular part of of the process. So I would say these 3 techniques have helped me because they give me that holistic view, and I do them concurrently. I'm always taking in information and plotting it in these 3 models. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts? Okay. I'm in the middle of Generation X, right smack in the middle. So I have all these references here. Sharing is caring, if you remember the Care Bears. We've done all this elicitation work. We've elicited the 5 W's and the H at the strategic, tactical, and operational levels. We figured out who are all the stakeholders. We figured out the end-to-end processes, both current state and future state. And we don't do this just to gather information. We have to share it. We've done a lot of work to collect this information, synthesize it, and make it useful to people. So now we have to share it with people. And the point of this is to create a common understanding. If you have a particular solution with a feature that you're working on, it's useful to talk to different stakeholders to tell them what this particular solution is going to be and use words that they understand. I think we're really good at deciding how to talk to the technical people versus the business people versus the end users, for example. So remember that onion diagram. Depending on who you're talking to in that stakeholder onion diagram, you can change how you communicate. You can use different analogies to help these people understand. And I found that that's really useful. Some other tips. I find that slide decks are helpful. I know that people are tired of things like very long PowerPoint presentations, but I find that if you can get in there and communicate concisely and in a way that keeps people interested, I think that's helpful. It's also helpful to do frequent and consistent communication and be consistent in your terminology. If there are certain terms that this organization uses, then use those terms, even if it's not what you would use. Be consistent. When you're talking to different people, use the right terminology. Let people know if any of the information has changed. We know that as BAs, we don't just do the elicitation exercise once. We do the elicitation exercises throughout the whole project. So as information changes, as you are able to find out more information, or as certain information becomes irrelevant, it's important to let people know that the information has changed. This helps you do change management as well. I also find that it's helpful to have these end-to-end processes, end-to-end scenarios. People think that you're plotting this really long process map and they only care about the beginning part or they only care about the end part. I think it's important for us as BAs to explain why the whole process needs to be understood. If your stakeholder is someone at the end of the process, they need to understand what are all the things that were upstream that became inputs for them. Or if you have a group that is only concerned about the beginning of the process, they have to understand that everything that they do impacts other people down the line. So even if they don't think it's their problem to work on, I think it's important for them to understand that they play a piece in the big picture. Does anyone have any questions so far? So we talked about the 3 techniques that I use. They may be useful for you. Use the techniques that are useful to you to get information quickly. And I think whatever helps you get the big picture that then supports you to get down to the lower levels is really helpful. Decide on the technique that you want to use, but then share with people so you have that understanding across all the stakeholders. And I want to take it a step farther. Business analysts don't just elicit information and hand it off to the solution team and we're done with it. We're trying to help our stakeholders create solutions that deliver value, that's going to help them meet their goals. You remember that strategic plan with the roadmap and the ultimate goals they're trying to achieve? I think it's important for us to help them define success. Some of this can be a little painful and it's like pulling teeth, but I think it's really important to help them visualize, what does your future state look like? And it needs to be specific. Remember those SMART goals? Let's come up with some SMART goals that we can actually measure and see if we were successful. How will we know if the whole project and solution were worth the effort? And when we're thinking about success, think about success for each layer of the stakeholder onion diagram. And will we be able to measure the criteria? Do we have to do surveys? Excuse me. Do we have to do surveys, or are we going to be able to look at data to see if we've made improvements? So these are the things that we should be talking to our stakeholders about right at the beginning of the project. We put in a lot of time and effort into this project and the solution. How are we going to know if we were successful? And that's why you have to have some performance metrics. And then we also have to get our stakeholders to decide, what are they going to do with these performance metrics? If we put in all this effort into the solution and we haven't quite met our goals, our objectives, what are we going to do? Or if we have we've been collecting metrics data, but it's not useful, then why are we measuring these things? So that's why it's really important to help them define success. And if you can come off as someone who advocates for them, that you want them to be successful, then they will support business analysis a lot more. Does anyone have any questions or does anyone have any stories about how they've done this? Okay. I know this is a lot of material to absorb, and you will have access to these slides and the recording. I want to sum this up with some final tips. You know that business analysis isn't exactly a step-by-step procedure, but I'll give some tips here just for some encouragement. Confirm what you're trying to accomplish in your business analysis work. What are the objectives you're trying to achieve? Are you trying to, for example, do some risk analysis? Are you, for example, trying to understand customer segmentation? Depending on what outcome you're trying to come up with, then you can choose which techniques to apply. And don't necessarily announce what you're going to do, right? They don't need to see how things are done behind the scenes. You just need to make sure that you are achieving your mission. So focus on creating that shared understanding amongst your stakeholders and solving the right problem. If you have if you have the goal in mind, it really helps you stay focused on the right path. Always analyze changes in information. So as you go throughout the life of the project, information will change. So analyze whether or not the new information impacts the solution. Use words and models they understand. So be careful about jargon. Be careful about vague wording that's not useful to certain people. Also use words that are consistent. Use their terminology. Keep in mind the long-term success criteria. What are we trying to achieve? And if what we're building is going to achieve it? How do we measure it? How do we assess whether or not we were successful? Ask for feedback. Sometimes it's useful to check in with people and say, am I going too fast? Do I need to clarify anything? Is this information useful to you? And given this information, who else should I talk to? So this is sort of like the metadata of your business analysis. Talk to your stakeholders and engage with them to help build that trust. If you're asking these kinds of questions, it means that you care about their participation in the project. You're not trying to force a template on them, and you're not trying to cut corners that might be important to them. And finally, document your analysis results. Package it up in such a way that people can understand. Also, it's important to document how you did your analysis. Did you do workshops? Did you do interviews? Did you do surveys? When you write down what you did, then your value becomes tangible and reusable for future projects. And this is how you prove your value as a business analyst. This is how you show that you're not just overhead. You can show your results by showing your analysis and making sure that it's reusable for the future. Does anyone have any questions? And you can always get in touch with me. I am on LinkedIn. And I will hand the floor back to the chapter.
Thank you. Great presentation.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Emily. We really appreciate it.
Great. I hope that this has provided some food for thought and has given you some confidence to work on a project and not feel like you're just overhead.
Absolutely. Which is a horrible feeling to have. I know that you stress on that, but having to constantly quantify and validate and argue for one's value is quite stressful, and it adds to everything else that we do in business. So, yeah, you're getting some great kudos there on the chat.
Awesome.
Steve, did everybody send you the information for the raffle?
Have everybody registered for the raffle?
Okay, sounds good. So before you do that, bear with me for a second. I'm just going to quickly open. Actually, no, I won't do that in the interest of time. I was going to talk about the digital library, like I mentioned. I was going to give it some more airtime, but we'll do it at a different meeting because we're going to try to bring some more materials and testimonials there. But I do like that a handful of you replied in the chat about how you have used it. So, okay. So, Steve, let's do the raffle.
We're going to do a quiz first.
Oh, yes, yes.
Can you see my screen with the quiz?
Seeing the URL right now, right? The QR code.
Yes.
Okay. All right, everybody. You get that?
You want to join using that code dementi.com. We'll have a quick quiz and then a raffle. Some people joining that. In fact, I think I'll stop it.